Hello, and welcome to the next installment of Law & Order, the video series where I look at and unpack stories from games. In this one, we'll be looking at the indirect sequel to The Dark Descent. It takes place in the same universe as The Dark Descent, but as you'll see, it takes place at a later period in time. This game was different in terms of gameplay, but had the same, if not a similar atmosphere, and this is because this one was developed by a different company, the Chinese Room, as opposed to Frictional Games. This was more of a linear walking simulator type experience as opposed to the more expansive and more interactive Dark Descent. Gone was the fear of running out of oil for the lamp, as the one in Machine for Pigs was unlimited, as well as the sanity mechanic. Despite this, it still had a dark and fairly interesting story. This game came out in September 2013, but despite that, there will be spoilers in this one for A Machine for Pigs and The Dark Descent. With that being said, let's get into the video. It's 1899, 60 years after the events of The Dark Descent. A wealthy industrialist named Oswald Mandus wakes up after an expedition to Mexico. This expedition was a disaster for Mandus as he ended up contracting a strange disease which gave him strange and regular dreams about some sort of machine. Mandus, after he wakes and leaves his room, hears his two children Enoch and Edwin calling out for him, so he sets out to find them. The house randomly starts shaking and the roar of machinery bellows out beneath him. He walks into an office and receives a telephone call from a strange man, who goes on to tell him that his children are trapped in the machine that he heard activate earlier, and that in order to save them he needs to reactivate the machine by repairing it, as it's been damaged by a saboteur. Fully in line with the titles of these games, yep, Mandus has lost some of his memories. He slowly gets back his memories as he proceeds deeper into the depths in order to fix the machine. Along the way, he encounters horrific-looking pig men who chase him and try to attack him, almost as if they are guarding something. Mandus is betrayed by the person on the phone eventually, who tells him that his two children are actually dead. This betrayal, now that Mandus has reactivated the machine, means that this machine has unleashed what seems to be an army of the previously encountered pig men onto the unsuspecting and totally unprepared streets of London, where these pig men kill and drag people into the depths. Mandus regains a specific memory, that he was the one who created this machine in the first place. In order to make amends and atone, I guess, he travels to the heart of the machine with the aim of destroying it. This machine, totally sentient, pleads with Mandus not to destroy the machine. He chooses to destroy it anyway, and London, near destroyed, is now saved. So a fairly short game at around 4 hours long, but as with these games, a big part of them is what happened prior to the game's main events. There's plenty of backstory to digest here, so let's start with looking at Oswald Mandus. As discussed already, Oswald Mandus was a wealthy industrialist who owned and operated a meat processing plant. This meat processing plant was established in 1828, so at some point the family-owned business was passed on to him. He enjoyed hunting big game as seen from the glass cases in his home, along with the rifles on display, and he was an avid collector of art pieces. At some point in his life, he married Lilybeth, who bore him twin children, Enoch and Edwin. However, Lilybeth died due to complications from childbirth, and Mandus never really got over her death. Mandus became more focused on his work and his business, and around 1890 he upgraded all of his factory's equipment and machinery to increase productivity and to provide a safer environment for his workers. But due to this obsession with providing the best machinery, this plunged him and the company into near financial ruin, even being denied credit by the bank for more money. Now this is where the slightly minuscule but still very relevant link to The Dark Descent comes in. You see, Mandus was the great-nephew of Daniel. Mandus has the remnants of Daniel's paperwork, and Mandus discovered the collection of vitae from Daniel's time in Castle Brennenburg and his work involving the orbs. With nothing left to lose, Mandus sets out to try and find fortune in the hope that he can save his business. Using Daniel's notes and research of the locations of these orbs, Mandus discovered the possibility of an orb being located inside an Aztec tomb in Mexico, so Mandus travelled to Mexico with his two children. Now here is where it gets slightly dark. Mandus recovers the orb, but as with these orbs, some sort of power gets imbued upon Mandus, and he temporarily gained the ability to see into the future. More specifically, the future of his two sons. 16 years into the future, his sons were to die in agony in the trenches during the First World War in the Battle of the Somme. Desperate to prevent his sons going through the ordeal, bizarrely, he decided to sacrifice his sons on the altar of the temple. Yep, it turns out that Oswald Mandus killed his own children. After this was done, he took their skulls back to London, and when he got back, he was stricken with a mysterious disease he'd brought back from Mexico. Stricken with grief as well and guilt at what he'd done, his view on the world and all of its people drastically changed. He began to view them all as nothing more than pigs. He had this crazy obsession and goal of somehow averting the coming wars by creating a machine which could use human sacrifice as its core. I know, mental, it gets crazier, but stay with me. Oswald Mandus then began constructing his new machine. He managed to convince the local orphanage to grant him a child labour program, helping these orphan children into work by gifting them sausages and likely other meat products. He would send these orphans inside the machine's pipes to clean them, but these children would die and get boiled to death inside the machinery. He then began abducting beggars and thieves off the streets of London. He thought that these people wouldn't be missed and he'd be doing London a favour. After years of long work, and what I can only assume to be a full-scale copy of the temple back in Mexico, Mandus's machine was finally complete. Not only that, but this thing could also pretty much operate on its own. Now here's where it goes up a level in craziness. In order to facilitate fully automated operation, Oswald would use his own soul, or at least part of it, as the core of the machine. This machine would slaughter human beings and their blood would be utilised as a sacrifice for the machine. This mirrors what Oswald had hoped to achieve through the sacrifice of his own children back in Mexico. As we see from the end of the game, Oswald Mandus chooses to sacrifice his own life to shut down the machine. He sits down in a chair and mechanical arms literally rip Mandus's heart from his chest. This kills him, and as he and the machine are still linked together by a shared soul, the machine ceases to function. Despite seeing the future, Mandus realises that he, someone as insignificant as himself, is powerless to stop the future happening. So the world enters into the 20th century, leading to history as we know it in terms of World War I and II happening. Now, naturally, people around Mandus saw a noticeable change in his behaviour, which would have probably been bordering on full-scale weirdo level, so members of his rifle club sent a man referred to only as Professor A to investigate. Professor A was really sent to gain an understanding of the mental well-being of Mandus. Mandus correctly assumed that this professor was sent to spy on him due to feigning an interest in his machinery. Due to the professor's suspicion, it's not known, but Oswald likely threw him into the machine, judging by this conversation here.
I can meet him, your great engineer. How marvelous. I must say, Mr. Mandus, my excitement is almost unseemly.
Yes, I can see that. Step this way, Professor. I will be right behind you.
Mandus, where the devil are you? I can't see a damn thing. Mandus! We are the pig, Professor. They are all the pig.
Remember I mentioned that Oswald put part of his own soul into the machine? Well, the half of his soul inside the machine led to the machine becoming sentient. This also gave birth to another persona called the Engineer. Given that Mandus and the Engineer were technically now two separate sentient beings, this essentially made Mandus wake up from the hatred that he had for everyone and everything, and realising what he'd been doing, and this drove him to try and take his own life. He failed, but determined to at least do something, he managed to damage the machine enough to shut it down for good, meaning that the saboteur Mandus was chasing throughout the game was actually a result of his own handiwork. He went to his bedroom after shutting the machine down, and still suffering from the illness he'd contracted whilst in Mexico, he fell asleep. This leads us into the events of the game where Mandus wakes up with amnesia and goes in search of his two dead children. The voice he hears talking to him over the phone is the Engineer, who essentially tricks Mandus into reactivating the machinery so that this sentient machine can fulfill its goal of sending a ferocious army of ManPigs up to the streets of London to wreak havoc and to feed people to this hungry machine. Along the way, when Mandus encounters hostile ManPigs, these were actually sent by the Engineer to stop Mandus from sabotaging the machine for a second time. So with the origins of Mandus, the Mexico expedition, his illness, the machine and the Engineer discussed, we should probably now discuss the ManPigs and how they came to be. When it came to the creation of the grotesque ManPigs, Mandus used the knowledge of Vitae from Daniel's notes, and he also had the remains of Alexander of Brennenburg's gatherers shipped to him. Mandus came up with an unstable liquid he called Compound X, a mixture of Vitae and other fluid, which when combined is highly corrosive and sensitive to light. This would also have a destructive effect on living beings if consumed, judging by this description of transformation where the writer describes teeth falling out and excreting blood. Compound X would be used to merge human cells and pig cells, and in a human corpse with pig parts surgically attached to it. A light would be shone upon the specimen and it would miraculously reanimate. This is also the reason why light flickers when Mandus approaches a ManPig. Seriously, who writes this shit? Mandus did experiment with an earlier version of the ManPig, but this one ended up going wrong and the ManPigs ended up permanently teleporting between two worlds, leading to them going absolutely insane, leading to Mandus locking them up. We can probably ascertain that this other world that they were trapped between was the world of Alexander of Brennenburg. So the ManPigs being distant relatives of, or even modified gatherers themselves, is an interesting link to Castle Brennenburg and the Dark Descent. But that is ultimately it for this one. Despite this game not being as enthralling and as scary as the Dark Descent and its add-on Justine, it did have its creepy moments and a fairly decent story, as do all the other Amnesia entries. With videos done on both the Dark Descent and Justine done as well as this one, this means that we only have one more to go, in Amnesia Rebirth, so that one will be coming soon. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support, and leave a comment down below on your thoughts. But for now, take care and I'll see you in the next one.